Okay, today we are in interpersonal communication, 203, and we're going to talk about romantic relationships. We've discussed friendships, family relationships, intrapersonal, so how do you take care of yourself to make sure that you are healthy so that you can enter into one-on-one relationships with other people that are also healthy, as well as issues of conflict. So we're finishing off with romantic relationships, which obviously is something that's extremely important to know, people. Uh, you know, it's hopefully important in your life, and there's ways in which you should take it seriously, as opposed to just thinking that you're going to fall backwards into healthy romantic relationships. There are some things that you can think about and do in your day-to-day life. There's one important exercise that I want you to get out of this if you get nothing else out of this discussion today, and we're going to do that exercise first. All right, so there's two things you need to do. Get out a piece of paper so you can make two separate lists. The first list is probably very easy because this is a list we've probably at least thought about. We've probably also written out a lot of these things. If you've ever done online dating, for instance, you've made a list of who your ideal partner is. So you need to make a list. So if you need to pause the video, go ahead and pause at any time. Make a list of various qualities you'd like in that person. Now, if it was up to me, I'd probably say you should probably limit that list to 5 things. Once you start getting past lists more than 5 things, now you're getting into things that, would be nice, but they're not priorities anymore. You can't have a list of 100 priorities. You can have a list of about 5 priorities. Maybe 10 if you're a little bit indecisive and you're 20 and you're still trying to figure out what it is you want in a romantic relationship. But think about, what is important to you. All right, and this can be in any order at the moment, right? So interest. So should the person be involved in certain hobbies? What are their intentions, right? So does the person, do you just want something very dating, casual? Do you want someone who is in it for long-term marital intentions? All right, this becomes important. If you go into a relationship and you're like, I just want something casual, I'm just out there dating, and the person goes into it thinking like, no, like I'm looking for something serious long term. That's not really fair to either one of you, and it's going to cause a lot of hurt feelings later on. So you want to make sure that yeah, what are the intentions that you want of that person? Religion, if that's something that's important, maybe you write down religious ideas. Values, what are their overall values? Do they want a family and children? Obviously, that's going to become an issue. Physical characteristics. Obviously, physical characteristics change. There's a lot of talk in the media, and they're like downplay physical characteristics, and beauty's on the inside. All that stuff's true. At the same time, it's like you should be sexually attracted to your partner, right? Sex is important, and being attracted to your partner long term is important. So something along these lines, it is of interest. It's not a value of zero, right? And it's not the most important thing, but it's not a value of zero either. All right, if we're gonna be honest about it. Long-term career goals. So this can figure into financial ideas as well as the career aspirations. So do you want a person who's really focused on money, and you and your partner, like you want to be involved in a family that's making $1 million so you can live $1 million lifestyle, or do you want to downsize and you're okay making $50,000 a year as a family because you want to dedicate more time to leisure activities or hobbies or other interests, right? There's no judgment on my part what your ideal partner looks like, but the important thing is that you figure out what the ideal partner looks like for you. All right. Now, after you figure out of 5 to 10 of these qualities that you're looking for in a partner, now you need to rank them. All right. So are religious and values like the most important? If religion's very important, it might need to be number one. All right. If kids are important, and you go around and you meet someone and they're like, I don't want any kids, but kids are your number one priority, it's like that's probably not going to work out very well long term. It might be fun for a couple years, but at some point, you two are going to have a hard discussion and probably a fight as to whether or not kids are going to happen. Same thing with finances. All right. When you're in college, everyone's kind of in the same boat. Everyone's young, figuring out their careers. You might still be figuring out what qualities you want in a partner and a spouse long term. But, if you want to have long-term intentions, it's like these are things you need to think about. Now, a lot of people do this all the time. Who is my ideal, boyfriend, girlfriend? This is good. Now we're going to flip it on its head, all right? And this is something that most people don't do. but I think it is just as, if not more important, that you should be paying attention to these qualities as well as the qualities of your partner. So, what do you need to do in order to attract the person with the qualities that you just listed? A lot of people don't do this. All right. A lot of people sit around saying, like, I want to date a supermodel who makes $1 million and drives a BMW and lives in a mansion. But I'm sitting around all day eating Cheetos, playing Nintendo. I'm not going to attract that kind of a person. All right. So this is something that you really need to take issue with in your own day-to-day life. Like, if you want to attract a certain person, you need to think about, like, what sort of qualities is that person going to be attracted to, so that when I cross paths with that person, I'm in a good position to sort of, let that person know that I have all the qualities that they're probably looking for, right? So are there habits that you need to change in your life, right? Certain interests, like your appearance, right? If you want to date a supermodel, but, you haven't showered in a few days because you're too busy playing Call of Duty, that might be an issue, right? Might be a problem, okay? Your career, your location, your friend circle, your religion. Same here. If you want someone who's like, let's say you're Catholic and you want someone deeply committed to the Catholic faith, but you're sort of this lapsed Catholic who goes to church or mass like twice a year, you're probably not going to attract a person who's like, very invested in Catholicism. So if you want someone who's very invested in Catholicism because you're Catholic, well, the question becomes, is like, what are you doing to study up on your own Catholic religion, to be involved in your Catholic community? Where are you sort of with your own faith and your community of faith that's around you? All right. You can't sort of put all the onus on, like, I need the perfect partner, but I'm doing nothing to attract that person to me. All right. So these are qualities that most people don't think about. Some advice I give to younger people who, ask me sometimes about dating, which, I'm definitely not an expert in. But what I tell them sometimes, right, if you're young enough, it's like, maybe you need to take like 6 months, maybe a year, right? If someone's going around saying like, I'm having a hard time with romantic relationships, etc. It's like, well, maybe take 6 months to a year and just do this stuff. Just do this stuff for yourself. Like, figure out your habits, your fitness goals, your religious aspirations, your values. Like, figure out yourself. Like, figure out what it is you want for 6 months to a year, and then go back out and try to start dating people. Right? You're not going to like switch you're not going to just sort of like switch it off and switch it on as far as the habits of your life. You're not going to completely change your habits overnight. But maybe you just need a break, and you need to say, okay, I really need to assess who it is I want, right? Who it is I would like to attract. And then I need to assess, like, what am I doing in my life to attract that person? And maybe your own life just needs a major overhaul. All right. And maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't know what your religious beliefs are, your values. Maybe you don't know if you want kids or not. Take 6 months to a year and figure that out, because you need to have that stuff ready to go. Because again, when you go out there and you're looking for the ideal partner, you want to make sure that you are attracting the person that you want to attract based on your own habits, based on your own characteristics. So make a list. Ideal partner, make a list for what qualities do I need to have in my own life in order to attract that type of person, and then maybe you have to change up some of the habits in your own life in order to go out and find who that person is. A couple academic terms. The first is assortative mating. I've talked about this in some other classes, so it might be a repeat if you're not in my class or you're just watching my videos. But for my interpersonal students, right? Assortative mating. What this means is that you're most likely going to end up with someone with a similar background. The idea of opposites attract is mostly a myth. If it's not completely a myth, it's definitely exaggerated. If you think about it, it makes sense that this assortative mating concept, right? It's like, where do you meet people? All right, especially when it's like you date other people who are in college, probably in your major. If you are dating in your early to mid 20s, it's like you're meeting people who have similar career goals or are working in the same field as you. If you meet people at church, it's like obviously they have the same religious value background as you. You meet people in your hometown, they live in similar geographical locations as you, right? So you're meeting people who have very similar backgrounds as you. Yeah, even when we talk about like geography, right? The idea of like I live in a small town versus I live in a big city, just the fact my environment shapes my values and beliefs. So these things matter when it comes to who it is you're attracted to, and you're most likely attracted. You're going to be dating people who are sort of in your circle, and the people in your circle, the people that are in your circle that you have access to with regard to, possible dating situations, they're going to be people with similar backgrounds, right? Because they got into your circle, whether it's college, your major, your career, your religion, they got into that circle because they have similar interests as you. So that's what a sort of mating is. Reciprocal liking, this is a long discussion I have with some of my freshman students. This is what it means, and then this is why it's important, right? It means that you tend to like people who like you, obviously, right? You tend to behave towards people the way they behave towards you. So if someone is kind to you, you're likely to be kind back, right? And at the same point, right, if you want me to listen to you, it's like you should listen to me first, right? So if I want someone to be kind to me, it's like I should be kind to them, right? Because that's what reciprocal liking is. Now, this is of interest when it comes to people who go around and say that they have certain values or characteristics for themselves, specifically around the idea of like kindness, compassion, tolerance, inclusion, all those other nice words that we'll hear in, you hear in diversity seminars. My problem with this discussion is that, or my problem with the way in which some people unpack those terms, kindness, compassion, tolerance, inclusion, is they say that those things are true up into a point. So here we go. If you say that you are a kind person, a true test as to whether or not you're a kind person is to whether or not you are kind to people who are unkind to you, right? If I'm kind to people who are kind to me, if I'm compassionate towards people who are compassionate to me, if I like people who like me, that says nothing about me. All that says is that I'm a human being who acts as every other human being acts, right? Everyone likes people who like them. So it's a ridiculous statement to go around and say, I'm super nice, but only to people who are nice to me, right? I'm tolerant, but only if you tolerate me back. Everybody does that, right? So a true test of these characteristics that are really going to push you as far as like you figuring out what your true values are, is to whether or not you can act within that value system towards people who don't act that way towards you. So if you meet people who are intolerant of you, who are not kind to you, who are, who don't treat you well, we can get into things like malicious or hateful behavior, but we don't even have to go that far, right? We can talk about like the person who's checking out your groceries. Maybe they're just being very mean, right? And if you try to be nice back to that person, oh, that tells me something about who your real character is, right? So anytime people come around and say, I'm nice, but then I look at them and they're not acting nice towards people who aren't nice to them, I'm like, you're not nice. You're doing reciprocal liking, which is what everyone does. You like people who like you. Congratulations. That's not an accomplishment. All right. A true test of your values, if you go around and say you're tolerant, you're compassionate, you're inclusive, you're kind, you're nice, you're whatever, right? Do you act that way towards people who don't act that way towards you? That's something that's remarkable. All right. So you should think about that as far as, your own values and your own behavior. All right. Okay. Stages of a relationship as far as a romantic relationship. You have the initiating stage, which I call the every college party question phase, right? Name, hometown, and major. That's what we would do, right? We go around and we just sort of initiate conversation. The experimenting phase is when you get into self-disclosure, so you test the limits of the interaction. So let's think about a third or fourth date. Maybe you start to breach the subject of politics or religion. So you open the door just a little bit, like, hey, like I grew up, let's go with Catholic. I didn't grow up Catholic, but let's just do that, right? I grew up Catholic. And then if the person doesn't respond back, you say, oh, I experimented with trying to disclose some information. I realized that I tested the limits and that went a little bit too far. So maybe we have to wait 2 or 3 more dates before we're going to breach the subject of religion, right? Or this is who I voted for. This is, my politics. And the person responds, oh, now I know that I can sort of disclose more information about, political beliefs, feelings, what have you. All right. So that's the experimenting phase. Is you have these few months of like constantly trying to push the limits a little bit to figure out what is it okay to talk about, and at what rate. It's like eventually, if you have a good, healthy relationship, you should be able to talk about everything. But you're trying to see like how quickly can I ramp this up with regard to breaching these different subjects. The intensifying phase, and then the integrating phase. The integrating phase is when you start to share space. So if you and your significant other drive to school every day together, maybe they just always leave their book bag in the back seat of your car. After a few months of a relationship and you start, staying the night at each other's house, maybe they have a little spot in the medicine cabinet where they keep their toothbrush, or they have a drawer, in your dresser where they keep, extra clothes or whatever, right? So anytime you start to have shared space, this is the integrating phase. Or even like time and property. So if it's like a set time, it's like, look, every Friday, like you and I are going out on a date. Like that's sort of like our date night, if you will. It's just sort of note, it's always on the schedule. All right, this is integrating. Like all of a sudden, their time has become my time and vice versa. The bonding phase is when other people see you as connected. So you might think like Facebook official, but you can also think about, when you go home and your mom says like, hey, where's Sally at? What's Sally doing? When people around you, your family, your friends are asking about that person when they're not in the room and they start to see you as a pair, that's the bonding phase. All right. And then finally to dissolve, which is always a maybe question, right? It's something that all of your relationships, except for one, hopefully, are going to dissolve, right? And hopefully once you find that one, like it doesn't dissolve. But this is one of those difficult things that happens in the majority of relationships you're going to have, is that they're all going to dissolve except for one. And you get to this question of like whether or not, can we no longer get past certain conversations? So, we're not completely open about certain information. The person's keeping something from you. You're not interested in sharing time, space, or property with that person. You feel like I still want my own space and I'm not willing to bring that person fully into my space. All right, then you get to these questions, okay, maybe it's time to dissolve. All right. Okay, what I'm going to do is I tried to run this TED Talk just like in the PowerPoint and it wasn't working. So I'm just going to put the link down below. It's 5 minutes long. It's definitely worth a watch party because I'm just going to do a quick version of this that is not as exciting as the animated version here. All right. So you have Cupid, who we all know, right? It's this little guy who flies around and shoots arrows in you at Valentine's Day. And the myth is that whoever he shoots, the next person that person sees, that's who they fall madly in love with. All right. So you have Cupid and you have Psyche. All right. Psyche is this beautiful young girl, the most beautiful girl in the land kind of thing. Cupid is sort of known as the god of like Eros love, which is this sort of erotic excitement, love at first sight, that sort of thing. Like you're not sure if it's lust or love or, but it's exciting. It's adventurous. All right. This myth was written in the 2nd century. Psyche is the most beautiful girl in the world. Prior to, like, we know the story of Venus, right? The goddess Venus is the most, beautiful woman ever, but now she's getting older. So we have this sort of Saturn devouring his son sort of phenomenon where the older individual is getting jealous of the youthfulness of young people, right? So Venus, who is now older, is very jealous of Psyche because Psyche's the new it girl, right? Like she's, this, the most attractive, young, beautiful, girl that there is. And Venus is like, hey, that used to be me. I'm super sad about it. All right. So Venus is getting a little jealous. And so what she does is she sends Psyche and she says, hey, or excuse me. All right. Venus sends Cupid and she's like, hey, Cupid, I want you to, we're going to play a little trick here on Psyche. I want you to go follow Psyche around. And as soon as she sees this beastly man, I want you to shoot her with an arrow so she falls madly in love with some ugly dude, right? That's Venus's plan, right? Cupid go stalk Psyche for a while. As soon as Psyche sees this like grotesque, ugly, beastly individual, go ahead and shoot her with an arrow so she'll fall in love with this ugly dude. And, I can stop being jealous because I know that her life is going to be terrible because she's in love with this ugly dude, all right? That's Cupid's job. Cupid instead follows her around. Cupid falls in love with Psyche as he's looking at her, and he makes a decision like, I'm going to look at her, and while I'm looking at her, I'm going to prick myself with an arrow, so now I'm falling madly in love with Psyche. Then, Cupid's a god, Psyche's a girl, or a human, so you have this, like, god and human relationship again, as we see throughout, Greek and Roman myths, um, and on and on. Okay, watch the rest of the TED Talk to sort of see the end of the story. That'll be my the way I get you to watch the rest of this video. So I'm going to stop talking. You're going to have to figure out the rest of the story. It's 5 minutes long. Go ahead and watch it real quick. I'll leave the link down in the YouTube comments. All right, so what we get to with these stories of Cupid and Psyche is, why is love complicated? And part of the reason it's complicated is because it does have this element of eros to it, which is this sort of like, again, it's like love at first sight. It's that erotic love. It's the excitement love. But we know that that doesn't last forever, right? We've termed this like the honeymoon phase. So there has to be other forms of love that sort of play into it. So you have this sort of, the first time I see someone, is it lust or is it love at first sight? Is it just lust at first sight or is it love at first sight? And there's this very confusing tension with regard to what it is. The other thing that's interesting with, Cupid and Psyche is they also have this sort of Romeo and Juliet element to it, where they're people from two different worlds, right? They're from two different cultures. Cupid's a god, Psyche is a human, and so it's like, can this love actually exist? Can it, can it last? Which is, a similar theme in Romeo and Juliet, which is then translated into the musical West Side Story, which is the exact same sort of thing. I think it was Spike Lee who wrote and directed Jungle Fever in the 90s, right? So this sort of like interracial aspect of like, can love exist in this, interracial world? All these sorts of like two people who are from different worlds falling in love, can it happen? This is a story of Cupid and Psyche. We also get to this question of whether or not, it does create pleasure. Love does create pleasure, but what kind of pleasure and for how long? So again, are you just attracted to the person because they're attractive, or are you attracted for those other qualities? And again, you got to make those other qualities. You got to make a list of these qualities as far as what is your priorities for making a long-term relationship. There are plenty of attractive people out there who are very good looking, that after about a week or two, you no longer want to be in a relationship with because they don't match other qualities that you're looking for. All right. So this is another question that is raised with this story of Psyche and Cupid. And then so finally, you have this last question on what should you build your romantic relationship if you want long-term success. A lot of people have lots of different answers. You got to figure that out for yourself. But again, you have to go back to what qualities am I looking for in a person and how do I prioritize them? If family and kids are important, you got to find someone who wants kids, right? If money and career aspirations are important, you got to find somebody who is willing to support you in that endeavor and who also might have these sort of like high career aspirations. If living in New York City is important, or living in the middle of Kansas is important, you got to find somebody who's willing to sort of live where you want to live, because where you live creates a certain type of lifestyle. All right. So figure out these qualities for yourself. What is it that you want, and then how are you attracting the type of person who would also want those sorts of things. Finally, if you're in my class, here are the quiz questions. All right, explain the idea of assortative mating, explain reciprocal liking, what happens during the experimenting phase of a relationship, and then briefly summarize the myth of Cupid and Psyche. Again, to fully summarize this myth, you need to watch the TED Talk. I'll leave the link in the comments below. All right, that is our discussion on romantic relationship. Next up, we will be reading The Great Gatsby.